Well, Tony, thanks so much for chatting to us.
Oh, my pleasure.
I'm actually personally quite excited to have the chat because I'm a music fan myself, and maybe you could just introduce yourself.
My name is Tony Renzoni, and I'm speaking to you from Brantford, Connecticut, beautiful Brantford, Connecticut, on the Connecticut shoreline. And my book that I wrote and it's available now is called Connecticut Rock and Roll: A History. First of all, the purpose of my book is twofold. First, I wanted to pay tribute to all the great and talented artists from Connecticut. Now, these are artists that have achieved fame on a national or international level, fame on a regional level, or on a local level. But I felt all of them should be included in my book. So whether they actually recorded a record or if they did, whether it was popular or not, it all deserves recognition in my book. This is all rock and roll as far as I'm concerned, because I understand the trouble and the hardships that these folks have gone through, even the local people, maybe more so on the local level. The other thing is I wanted just to be a tribute to all the thousands of fans of these groups, because where would these bands be without the fans? The second purpose was to highlight the many cultural events that have occurred in Connecticut over the years. These cultural events would include things like, sock hops and record hops and disc jockeys, radio stores, record stores, radio stations, and after-school hangouts.
What I'm interested in, I guess, this is a story about Connecticut rock and roll. What is the unique place of rock and roll in Connecticut, and what is the unique place of Connecticut in rock and roll specifically?
During my research, one thing that came up constantly were these great Connecticut artists that even I didn't realize some of them, and I didn't realize the impact that they had on the history of rock and roll. And many of these artists were kids still in high school, for crying out loud, and thinking of groups like the Nutmegs in New Haven, who made it big, and Five Satins. Well, they were just kids from high school, and what they accomplished was amazing, because what they produced was the song "In the Still of the Night," and to this day it's one of the most requested songs on the oldies records. So it's things like that got me interested. Who are these people? What did they accomplish? What groups were they involved in? People don't think of Connecticut as the mecca of music, but a lot of people from Connecticut have cut their teeth here in Connecticut. Guys like Gene Pitney, who became famous on a national, international level, he never forgot his hometown of Connecticut. So Connecticut has had an impact, a major impact on the history of rock and roll.
Could you sketch out the kind of scope of the book you've written? It sort of looks like it's largely chronological.
Okay. What I wanted to do is tell the story about the history of rock and roll in Connecticut. But not only that, but have it appeal to folks who never heard of Connecticut. Have people that are outside of Connecticut or even outside of the United States relate to what was going on in Connecticut because they had the same experiences. So what I wanted to accomplish was to go back and look at these cultural events or whatever. But the most important thing is when you take all these artists and you add all the fans and you add all these cultural events, you merge them all together, and that's when you get the rock and roll music scene.
What were the kind of key moments that you picked out in your book, or a few kind of key moments? Maybe there's too many to mention all of them, but a few key moments that you kind of chronologically focused in on and picked out.
I tried to go into each decade because each decade was very important in the development of rock and roll. You get into the 60s, and that's when things really exploded. And even in New Haven alone, there were like 10,000 bands. One group in particular, where to this day we're just baffled how this group didn't make it nationally with some of their songs, and that was the Wild Weeds from Windsor, Connecticut. And the lead singer and the writer of the song went on to groups like NRBQ, and now he's one of the most sought-after songwriters in the world for that sort of thing. But when I was a little kid, my older brother Vince, would bring home these great rock and roll records and R&B records. He would come home, listen to side A, but flip it over to side B. And that had a profound influence on me, because I'm hearing songs by Jerry Lee Lewis or Elvis or whoever the artist might be that I never heard before. And I took that a step further when I got older. So when I bought like a Beatles record or a Stones record, I would buy, I think it was Can't Buy Me Love by the Beatles, flip it over on the B side, and lo and behold, it was Can't Do That. When I was in college, a friend of mine was Joe Sia. You may not recognize the name, but you certainly have seen his work. Joe became a famous world-renowned rock photographer. He became famous in Woodstock. Rolling Stone commissioned him to Woodstock. Anyway, at one point, my idea was to have Joe supply me with some of these great photos, and I would do the research. Initially, I didn't have anything in mind except to maybe go around to schools and talk a little bit. Unfortunately, Joe passed away at an early age. So at that point, I decided to shelve the whole idea. But it was my wife, Colleen, and daughter, Carrie, who urged me to write this book, because I gathered all this information. And I said, oh, okay, let's do it. Then it was like, well, how do I write a book?
What was the kind of process of researching this like for you? How did you how did you find out all this information?
I tend to over-research things because I'm so involved. Once I get into a subject matter, it took me a long time to write this book because I wanted to get it right. And the way you get it right, in my mind, is using various sources. Most importantly, newspaper archives or the publication archives. Sometimes people forget, or sometimes people can't tell you this whole story, but these newspaper articles, these archives, are great because it's in real time. But I also use personal knowledge. I was in college when Elton John and his first U.S. tour, well, none of us knew who Elton John was. And consequently, the arena or the auditorium was only half filled. And this was right before he took off. So that's a personal recollection. One of the things that struck me, I didn't realize this, was Gary DiCarlo, who was one of the three guys from Bridgeport, Connecticut, who wrote the song that led up to the famous #1 song, Nana Hey Hey Kissing Goodbye. As fate would have it, I believe I'm the last person to interview Gary because at the time he was very weak, and I'm glad I got to talk to him. And he wanted me to tell the story through this book. He's a Bridgeport, Connecticut guy, but he wanted recognition for all of his work. And he never got that because the song was credited to a fictitious group, and he never got the credit that he deserved.
What do you think the value is of music, specifically maybe rock and roll?
No matter who you are, no matter where you are, no matter what you are, no matter what your political views, music brings people together. And that's the importance of music. Music is universal.